The sound of betrayal is not always loud. Sometimes it is hidden in the quiet clicking of a Swiss bank transfer or in a whispered phone call from a Western handler to a president who swore loyalty to his own people. Brothers and sisters, what I am about to share with you is not rumor, not speculation, but the most explosive revelation in modern African politics. On September 5th, 2025, thousands of pages of leaked intelligence files, 12,847 documents to be exact, shattered the illusion that Africa's struggles were only about poverty, corruption, or bad luck. These documents, now known across the continent as the African Files, exposed a $2.3 billion spy network called Operation Continental Harvest. Its mission was simple but devastating: to ensure that no African nation could take a single step without the CIA, MI6, or French intelligence already knowing in advance. What the files revealed was chilling. 7 sitting presidents, 889 cabinet ministers, over 150 senior military commanders, and even intelligence chiefs had been quietly selling their nation's secrets for years. Payments ranging from $25,000 a year to over $2 million annually. Bank accounts in Switzerland, luxury homes in Paris and Monaco, children's tuition at elite European schools paid by foreign agencies, and all the while these leaders stood before their people waving flags and making promises of sovereignty. So, let me ask you this: how can Africa ever be free if the very men trusted to guard her independence are on the payroll of foreign masters? How can young Africans hope for a future when their leaders are secretly serving the same powers that once colonized them? This is not just history repeating itself, it is betrayal on a scale we could hardly imagine. But now the truth is out. If you believe Africa deserves leaders who cannot be bought, type "not for sale" in the comments. Please share this video so others can see what mainstream media will never show. And subscribe, because in the next few minutes we will name names, reveal accounts, and confront the greatest political scandal of our time. On August 29, 2025, the world changed for Africa. A whistleblower from within European intelligence smuggled out a cache of 12,447 classified documents, an archive so vast that analysts now call it the African Files. Within those pages lay the blueprint of the most extensive espionage operation in modern history, Operation Continental Harvest. Launched in 2008, its stated purpose inside Western corridors was brutally clear: make sure no African government could act independently without Western intelligence knowing in advance. It was not about partnership. It was not about development. It was about control. The documents revealed a sprawling network of corruption, 2,300 African officials compromised, 7 sitting presidents and heads of state, 89 cabinet-level ministers, 156 senior military commanders, 23 intelligence chiefs. In total, Western agencies had spent over $2.3 billion in bribes and stipends during a 15-year period. The money bought loyalty, silence, and betrayal. The payments were not theoretical. They came with evidence: bank transfers, offshore accounts, receipts of tuition payments, hospital bills covered under false identities, and even real estate purchases in Paris, London, and Monaco. The very men who raised their voices against colonialism in public speeches were in secret on the payroll of the same powers they condemned. A key witness to all of this, Edward Sinclair, a former MI6 operative now under Russian protection in Moscow, confirmed the truth. We needed spies in every capital, every ministry, every military command, he admitted. Africa could not be allowed to make decisions outside Western visibility. The leaked files laid out in cold numbers what that meant: presidents receiving between $500,000 to $2 million annually, cabinet ministers $50,000 to $500,000 per year, military officers $25,000 to $200,000 annually, spy chiefs up to $1 million a year, and the betrayal was systematic. One president, codenamed Golden Eagle, received $24 million from CIA-linked accounts over 8 years. Another desert lion in North Africa pocketed $31 million from French intelligence since 2019, with real estate in Monaco and Switzerland as proof. In East Africa, Mountain Hawk sold out Chinese economic and military secrets for $19 million from a mix of MI6 and CIA. Forest King of Central Africa earned $27 million by betraying regional rebels and mining operations. And Coastal Chief of Southern Africa, once hailed as a liberation hero, took $22 million in exchange for giving up intelligence on opposition parties and economic planning. These were not isolated cases. The betrayal ran deep into ministries and militaries. In Angola, finance and defense ministers pocketed millions for leaking oil revenue data and procurement details. In Nigeria, petroleum ministers and central bankers sold out their nation's energy strategy to CIA fronts like Shell and Exxon. In Ethiopia, top staff around the prime minister accepted millions for information on Chinese infrastructure projects. In South Africa, state security officials passed sensitive domestic and BRICS intelligence to NATO and MI6. The documents even named military betrayal as Operation Shieldbreaker. In Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia senior officers were quietly feeding information to Western handlers. In return, they were promised cash visas, even the relocation of their families to Europe or America. The result, Western intelligence had advanced knowledge of nearly every major military operation, coup attempt, and resource negotiation in Africa for the last decade and a half. Whenever African leaders tried to break free by negotiating new mining contracts with China by tightening control of their gold or oil, Western capitals already knew because someone at the top had already been paid to reveal it. The exposure of Operation Continental Harvest finally explained a mystery that ordinary Africans had asked for years. Why did their nations always seem one step behind their dreams, sabotaged before they could even begin? Why did coups erupt just as reforms were announced? Why did foreign companies always outmaneuver African negotiators? The answer was brutal, because their own leaders had been betraying them from within. The leak of Operation Continental Harvest might have begun as a whisper, but by early September 2025, it had exploded into a continental earthquake. What made this scandal different from countless stories of corruption was not only the scale of the betrayal, but also the undeniable concrete evidence. Bank account numbers in Switzerland, property deeds in Paris, intercepted phone calls where African presidents demanded another $500,000 transfer tomorrow. These were not rumors. These were receipts of treason. The climax came when the identities behind the code names were confirmed. Golden Eagle, long celebrated as a West African oil champion, was revealed to have luxury properties in France and his children's private education paid by the CIA. Desert Lion, who had ruled North Africa for 4 decades, was exposed with $31 million in his UBS accounts alongside medical treatments in French hospitals disguised as diplomatic missions. Mountain Hawk, a president who won elections on an anti-Western platform, was found secretly sending Beijing's economic agendas to London and Washington for a price. Forest King, sitting on Central Africa's diamond wealth, had accepted $27 million in exchange for betraying Chinese mining operations. And perhaps the most heartbreaking of all, coastal chief, once a liberation hero who fought colonial powers, was unmasked as a Western asset with London properties and stock portfolios managed by CIA fronts. When these names surfaced, trust across the continent collapsed overnight. Africans realized it was not just abstract bad leadership. It was systematic betrayal engineered with Western money and executed by their own elected leaders. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. On September 3, 2025, the African Union convened an emergency session. Chairman Musa Faki Mahamat declared, "This is the gravest violation of African sovereignty since colonialism." Within hours, the AU announced sweeping measures, freezing of all accounts identified in the leaked documents, expulsion of Western diplomats suspected of intelligence operations, security clearance reviews across 23 countries, criminal charges being prepared for any confirmed agents of foreign powers. But the AU's moves, while historic, were quickly overtaken by the people. Across Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, and Egypt, the largest wave of protests in modern African history erupted. In Lagos alone, 2.3 million people filled the streets demanding accountability. Nairobi saw 1.8 million demonstrators calling for public trials of exposed leaders. In South Africa, 3.1 million citizens marched across multiple cities with banners declaring, "Not our president." Ghana and Egypt followed with millions rejecting foreign penetration. On social media, the uprising became unstoppable. Hashtags like #Africa Not For Sale and "Prosecute Traitors" generated billions of impressions within 72 hours. A 24-year-old student from Dar es Salaam, Amara Diallo, summed up the mood. "We now understand why Africa never develops despite our resources. Our leaders have been selling us out. This betrayal ends now." Internationally, the scandal threw Western capitals into panic. CIA Director William Burns reportedly told Congress, "This is a catastrophic intelligence failure. Decades of cultivated assets have been burned at once." In London, the MI6 chief warned Parliament that Russian and Chinese counterintelligence had made traditional infiltration obsolete. France, perhaps the hardest hit, admitted that losing its African spy network was a strategic disaster for its influence. Their immediate response betrayed the depth of the crisis emergency evacuation of intelligence officers from African countries. Rapid closure of offshore accounts linked to compromised leaders, offers of asylum to disgraced African officials willing to defect to the West, an $800 million budget allocated for propaganda campaigns denying the existence of Operation Continental Harvest. Yet none of it could erase the truth now seared into African consciousness. For 15 years, the very guardians of sovereignty had been selling Africa's soul in exchange for Western money. At that moment, the betrayal reached its emotional peak. The scandal was no longer just about politics or intelligence. It became a generational wound, a collective cry across the continent that said never again. The shockwaves of Operation Continental Harvest did not stop at headlines or hashtags. They ripped through the very foundation of African politics and civil life, creating consequences that no government could ignore. For ordinary Africans, the revelations explained decades of frustration, why reforms always collapsed, why development projects mysteriously failed, why foreign companies always seemed 2 steps ahead. Now the curtain had been pulled back. It was betrayal, not incompetence, that had crippled progress. On the streets, the betrayal translated into fury. In cities from Lagos to Nairobi, Accra to Johannesburg, protests swelled into a movement that observers compared to the Arab Spring. Only this time, it was not about bread prices or single policies. It was about the wholesale selling of national sovereignty. Young people in particular who had grown up under broken promises carried banners that read, "Africa is not for sale and leaders or traitors." Their demand was simple public trials and prosecutions for every official exposed. Civil society reacted just as strongly. Universities held emergency forums where professors described the scandal as the deepest rot in post-colonial Africa. Religious leaders denounced the betrayal from pulpits, calling it a sin against both God and people. Even trade unions, often cautious, declared strikes in solidarity with the youth. The sense of unity was striking across ethnic, religious, and regional divides. Africans agreed on one thing: betrayal at the top could no longer be tolerated. Politically, the fallout was seismic. Parliaments in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa saw heated debates with opposition MPs demanding immediate resignations of implicated ministers. In some countries, coalition governments began to fracture as smaller parties distanced themselves from presidents under suspicion. The legitimacy of entire administrations was suddenly in question. Could a president continue to govern when his name appeared in the leaked documents alongside proof of Swiss bank accounts and foreign cash transfers? The crisis also exposed a generational divide. Younger Africans, more digitally connected and less willing to accept excuses, pushed for sweeping change. Many began calling for new leadership models. Leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, who had built his reputation on resisting Western control, suddenly gained symbolic importance. His speeches about sovereignty and loyalty to the people circulated widely online, with many protesters quoting him directly on placards. Whether one agreed with all his policies or not, Traoré became a contrast, a leader not yet tainted by the stain of betrayal. Governments tried damage control. Some launched official investigations hoping to buy time. Others dismissed the leaks as foreign disinformation, echoing the very propaganda lines pushed by the West. But these denials only deepened public anger. When protesters had hard evidence, account numbers, wire transfers, intercepted emails, empty words could no longer cover the truth. Beyond individual leaders, the scandal forced a reckoning with the very structure of African politics. For decades, Western donors, corporations, and intelligence agencies had been intertwined with governance. Now that entire model stood exposed as toxic. Calls grew louder for financial transparency laws, bans on offshore accounts, and continental oversight mechanisms under the African Union. Perhaps the most lasting civil consequence was psychological. Africans had long suspected betrayal, but suspicion had turned into proof. The revelation created a new standard of vigilance. Citizens vowed to scrutinize every leader, every deal, every policy. Trust once broken would not be easily rebuilt. In the end, the political systems of Africa were left shaken, but also awakened. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also ignited a historic moment of unity among the people. Across the continent, a new question echoed in every square and every street. If our leaders cannot defend sovereignty, who will? While Africa burned with outrage, the rest of the world watched in disbelief. For Washington, London, and Paris, the exposure of Operation Continental Harvest was nothing short of a nightmare. For years, Western officials had quietly dismissed accusations of meddling as conspiracy theories. Now, with bank records and intercepted communications plastered across African media, denial was no longer an option. In the United States, the scandal hit especially hard. CIA Director William Burns, in an emergency closed-door briefing to Congress, admitted that decades of assets had been compromised simultaneously. The shock inside Washington was not only about losing intelligence, it was about losing leverage. For generations, U.S. foreign policy in Africa had relied on subtle influence, knowing which ministers could be swayed, which generals could be bought, which presidents would fold under pressure. Now those cards had been ripped from the deck and exposed to the world. American media, though hesitant at first, began to cover the story as Africa's Watergate, though always with careful framing. Some commentators called it a Russian or Chinese disinformation plot hoping to shield U.S. reputation. But others, particularly independent journalists, pointed to the undeniable Swiss bank accounts and transcripts. For many Americans, especially older citizens who remembered Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, the scandal sounded painfully familiar. Another empire overreaching, caught manipulating weaker nations and then scrambling to deny responsibility. In Europe, the panic was equally intense. In France, the revelation struck a mortal blow to its already fragile influence in West and Central Africa. With coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger already eroding Paris's grip, the exposure of French intelligence paying African leaders millions of dollars for oil and migration data felt like the final humiliation. French newspapers described it as a collapse of trust on a colonial scale. Meanwhile, Britain's MI6 faced harsh questions in Parliament about why taxpayer money was funding covert stipends to African presidents, while domestic programs faced cuts. Russia and China, by contrast, seized the moment. Moscow presented itself as a protector of African sovereignty, offering asylum to whistleblowers and sharing intercepted communications. Beijing highlighted its counterintelligence program, Project Dragon Shield, which had already warned African partners about suspicious transfers. Both countries framed the scandal as proof that Western powers could never be trusted. And in African capitals, leaders desperate for alternatives began to lean more heavily toward partnerships with the East. For the global South, from Latin America to Asia, the scandal resonated deeply. Commentators in Brazil and India compared it to their own experiences of Western interference, warning that Africa's pain was a mirror of global patterns. The betrayal became not just an African story, but a symbol of the imbalance between North and South in world politics. Back in the United States, ordinary citizens reacted with a mix of shock and resignation. Many older Americans watching the protests erupt across Africa asked difficult questions. If our government buys off foreign leaders abroad, how much of our own democracy here at home is also for sale? It was a sobering reminder that corruption and manipulation are never confined to one continent. In the end, Operation Continental Harvest was not just a scandal in Africa, it was a global scandal. It stripped away illusions about partnership, revealed the machinery of empire, and forced the world to reckon with a question that Africans had been asking for generations. When will sovereignty truly mean sovereignty? The revelations of Operation Continental Harvest have left no room for doubt. Africa's greatest enemy was never only outside its borders, it was the betrayal inside its very halls of power. For 15 years, leaders who promised freedom were secretly working as assets for foreign intelligence. Bank accounts swelled, families lived in luxury, while ordinary citizens suffered unemployment, insecurity, and underdevelopment. The mask has been ripped away, but exposure is only the first step. History teaches us that betrayal unpunished will always return. If those who sold Africa's secrets walk free, new traders will rise tomorrow with fresh contracts and deeper pockets. That is why this moment is not simply about outrage, it is about accountability. Across Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, and Egypt, millions have marched not just to denounce corruption, but to demand justice. Justice for stolen futures, justice for the youth who have been denied opportunity, justice for entire nations kept in chains by leaders who sold their souls. And yet this scandal also carries a warning beyond Africa. To those watching from America, from Europe, from the Caribbean, ask yourselves, if foreign agencies can so easily buy presidents and generals abroad, what does that say about the integrity of leadership anywhere? Corruption knows no borders, and empire will always use betrayal as its sharpest weapon. This is why figures like President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso have become symbols of a different path. Whether one agrees with him or not, his defiance against Western control represents the hunger for authentic leaders who serve the people, not foreign masters. But let us be clear, one man cannot cleanse a continent. Only an awakened population determined never again to be deceived can make betrayal impossible. So tonight the choice lies before us. Do we allow this moment to pass as another scandal soon forgotten, or do we mark it as the turning point where Africa and the world decided that sovereignty is not for sale? If you believe those who betrayed their countries should face trial for treason, type justice now in the comments. If you believe Africa deserves leaders who cannot be bought, share this video so the truth spreads further than any propaganda. And if you believe that truth matters more than headlines, subscribe to join this movement, because silence has never delivered freedom. The age of traitors is ending. The age of authentic leadership must begin, and it begins with us.